Okay, so today we're diving into something pretty major, I think.
Yeah.
And it's got huge implications for international law and, how we hold people accountable on that global stage.
Right. Accountability.
Yeah,
A
exactly.
huge topic.
It is. And the big news is, of course, the extradition of former Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte to the Netherlands.
Yeah, this is not just, another news story. This has some serious implications.
For sure.
And for you, especially if you're, really into understanding the world and how it works, especially if you're prepping for the civil services, this whole situation.
For sure.
It's like a textbook case in
Yeah.
international relations.
Absolutely.
You see the reach of international law, but also the limits.
Yeah.
And of course, it touches on human rights, which is always evolving.
Yeah, no, it's a perfect storm of like all these big ideas.
Exactly.
We're going to break it all down, figure out what this extradition means, why it happened.
All the circumstances.
Yeah, all the nitty-gritty, and then most importantly, what it could mean for the future of justice, not just within one country.
Right, beyond borders.
Beyond borders, exactly, globally.
That's what we're looking at.
So, to get into all of this, our main source today is a report from The Hindu.
Great source.
Really comprehensive.
Yeah.
And we're going to really try to pull out the key facts and insights
Absolutely.
about this indictment of Duterte by the International Criminal Court. What does the ICC even do? What are the roadblocks they run into?
The challenges they face.
Yeah. And then, of course, how has everyone reacted to this? Because it's a big deal.
Big deal.
Okay, so let's just jump right in.
Let's do it.
So first and foremost, what's the deal with this indictment?
Right. So on March 12th, Duterte was flown to the Netherlands, and he's facing charges at the ICC, and those charges are crimes against humanity.
Oh, wow.
Serious stuff.
Heavy stuff, yeah.
And this is all stemming from his war on drugs, which, was a campaign that ran from 2011 to 2019.
And it was, let's just say, controversial.
Yeah, a little more than controversial, I think.
Very forceful, very brutal.
Yeah, and I think, when we talk about this war on drugs, we have to talk numbers.
The scale.
Yeah, because the ICC is saying that Duterte is individually responsible. Those are their words for something like 30,000 deaths.
Yeah, that's a staggering number.
It's huge during that period. And, that's not just a number on a page.
No, these are human lives.
Exactly. It's people, and it shows just how serious these accusations are.
It really underscores the gravity of the situation.
It does. And for the ICC, this indictment is...
That's a big one for them.
Yeah, huge, because they've had a lot of trouble in the past.
Historically.
Yeah, trying to hold powerful leaders accountable.
It's not easy.
No, it's not. So this is a big moment for them.
Regardless of the outcome.
Regardless, yeah, just that it's happening is a big deal.
Absolutely.
Okay, so now here's something that I think is a little confusing.
The Philippines, they actually left. They withdrew from the ICC back in 2019. So how can the ICC even, go after Duterte now?
That's a really good question, and this is where it gets interesting, right?
Yeah.
So, yes, they did officially withdraw, but the ICC's position, and they've been pretty firm on this, is that their jurisdiction covers any crimes that happened before that withdrawal.
Okay.
So they're basically saying, look, those alleged crimes during the war on drugs, those happen when the Philippines was still part of the Rome Statute.
Right, which is what started the ICC.
Exactly, the treaty that created the court. So they're saying those crimes still fall under our authority.
Okay.
So it's sparked a whole debate about, how far does the ICC's power actually reach?
Yeah, that makes you think, right?
You think about state sovereignty.
Yeah.
The idea that a country can do what it wants within its own borders.
Right.
Versus this idea that some crimes are so bad, they have to be dealt with internationally.
Yeah, they transcend borders. So to understand this better, maybe we should back up a little.
A little history lesson.
Yeah, remind us about the ICC. Why was it created in the first place?
Okay, so... the worst crimes.
Like the worst of the worst.
The worst of the worst. Genocide, war crimes, and what Duterte is accused of, crimes against humanity.
Which basically means widespread attacks against regular people.
Civilians.
Yeah, civilians. So that's what the ICC is for.
That's the goal, to end impunity for these really horrible acts.
Okay, so who's actually part of this ICC?
So right now, there are 125 countries that have signed on to this Rome Statute.
Okay.
And when they sign on, they agree to cooperate with ICC, which means arresting people if the court issues a warrant.
So if the ICC says, hey, arrest this guy, these countries are supposed to do it?
In theory, yes.
Okay. But it doesn't always work that way in practice, does it?
Sadly, no. We've seen cases where they haven't followed through.
Like with...
Well, take Putin, for example, or Netanyahu. There are warrants out for them, but they haven't been arrested.
So that shows you the limits.
Right there, you see the limits.
Yeah.
The ICC doesn't have its own police force.
Right.
They rely on the countries themselves to enforce the warrants.
And on groups like Interpol?
Yeah, international cooperation.
Right. So what happens if a country just says, nope, not going to do it?
Well, then the ICC can go to the UN Security Council.
UNSC.
Right, and the UNSC, they can tell countries, you have to cooperate.
But that's not always easy, right?
Not always. You've got politics involved, countries with veto power.
So it's messy.
It can be.
Yeah. Okay. So back to Duterte. What's been the Philippines' official stance on this whole thing?
Well, Duterte himself, he's always said the ICC has no power over him.
Yeah.
Especially since the Philippines left the ICC.
Back in 2019.
Right, but the ICC's countered that, saying their mandate covers anything that happened before the withdrawal.
So it's back and forth.
It is a legal back and forth.
Yeah. And what about the current president, Marcos Jr.?
Yeah, what's he saying?
I feel like initially he wasn't super keen on working with the ICC.
You're right, he was hesitant
Yeah.
talking about national sovereignty.
Right. Like, this is our business.
Don't interfere.
Yeah.
But then they extradited Duterte.
So things change.
Big change,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Makes you wonder what's going on politically.
Definitely a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff.
For sure.
Okay, so zooming out a bit, this whole situation really shows us the hurdles the ICC faces, right?
Huge hurdles.
Yeah, like they want to be this global justice system, but it's tough.
It's not that simple.
So what are the biggest problems they're dealing with?
Well, the biggest one, like we said, is they don't have their own enforcement power.
Right, they rely on countries to cooperate.
Completely reliant, and some countries just refuse.
And then there's the whole political angle.
Huge factor.
Yeah, some countries see the ICC as, like, politically motivated, interfering in their affairs.
Overstepping,
Yeah.
accusations of bias,
Like picking on certain countries or leaders.
Exactly. And then you have the big powers. Sometimes they use their influence to protect their allies.
Right, like putting pressure on the ICC.
Diplomatic pressure, threats, all sorts of things.
It gets complicated.
Very complicated.
Okay, and you mentioned complementarity before. Can you explain that a bit more?
Sure. So basically, the ICC is supposed to step in only when a country's own courts can't or won't deal with these serious crimes.
So it's like a backup plan.
Yeah, the court of last resort.
Right. And in this case, the Philippines said, we can handle this ourselves.
That's what they argued.
But the ICC didn't buy it.
They looked at it and said, we don't see enough evidence of real effort.
So they decided to take over.
They launched their own investigation.
Interesting. Okay, so given all these challenges, what does this whole Duterte thing mean for the ICC going forward?
Well, on one hand, it's a win for them.
Yeah,
They actually managed to arrest a former president.
that doesn't happen every day.
Not at all. It shows they can hold powerful people accountable.
Even if it's like years later.
Exactly. It sends a message.
But at the same time, it exposes how vulnerable the ICC is
How much they rely on cooperation from countries.
and how much politics can influence things.
Absolutely.
And we can't forget the criticism about bias.
Yeah, that keeps coming up.
Like the ICC focuses too much on developing countries.
That perception is definitely out there.
And then you've got the whole geopolitical angle.
Like with China getting involved.
Yeah, because they've got their own issues with the Philippines.
It all gets tangled up.
Yeah, but even with all that, this case sets a pretty big precedent, doesn't it?
I think so. The main takeaway here is, even if a country leaves the ICC, they can't just escape responsibility for things that happened while they were members.
So it's like actions have consequences.
Exactly. Those commitments you make, they matter.
Okay, so what happens next in the Duterte case?
Okay, so the next step is a pre-trial hearing at the ICC.
What happens there?
So basically, the prosecutor presents their evidence, and the judges decide if there's enough to go to a full trial.
So it's like a screening process.
Yeah, to see if the case is strong enough.
And Duterte's lawyers, what will they be doing?
Well, they'll be trying to poke holes in the prosecution's case.
Like questioning the evidence?
Exactly. Maybe argue to dismiss the charges altogether.
Or even try to get him released?
Potentially.
Okay, and if they do go to trial, how long could that take?
Oh, trials at the ICC, those are marathons, not sprints.
Years.
Years, easily. It's a very thorough process.
Lots of evidence, witnesses, arguments.
The whole works.
Okay, so just to sum up, this whole Duterte extradition, it's a huge deal.
Monument.
For the ICC, for international justice, for the Philippines.
It really tests the system, shows both the strengths and the weaknesses.
For sure. It's like a case study in how international law actually works in the real world.
And how messy it can be.
Yeah, definitely not black and white.
Lots of gray areas.
Okay, so for you listening, especially if you're prepping for the UPSC exams, this case is gold.
Pure gold.
It's got everything. International relations, law, human rights.
All crucial topics.
And it's all playing out right now.
In real time.
So pay attention.
Take notes.
And think about the bigger questions like, how do we ensure accountability when even international courts have limitations?
That's the challenge.
It's a tough one.
No easy answers.
And speaking of resources, the source for this deep dive was The Hindu, so go check that out.
Great article.
Yeah. And as always, if you have any questions or want to explore this further, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment below.
We love hearing from you.
We do. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
On The Deep Dive.